Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, May 11th. We start the cast in Ukraine, where the natural gas pipeline operator is making a new move in the ongoing war. It has stopped Russian shipments through a key hub in the east of the country, which may force Russia to shift flows of its gas through territory controlled by Ukraine in order to reach its clients in Europe. Meanwhile, an official installed by Russia in Ukraine's Kherson region says the administration will ask President Vladimir Putin to annex the region. He says there are no plans to create a self-proclaimed republic. Gas troubles are also affecting Canada. Drivers across the country can expect more pain at the pumps today as gasoline prices push new records. Natural Resources Canada says the average price countrywide for regular gasoline hit 197.4 cents per liter on Tuesday for an all-time high. Prices are up more than 12 cents from a week ago. Prices averaged about $2.23 a liter in Vancouver, while in Toronto, prices averaged slightly under $2 a liter. Gasoline prices have spiked as oil tops $100 US a barrel. This is in part because of high demand for gasoline and because of supply disruptions related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All right, turning to a recent report by Leger and the Association of Canadian Studies, which found about 80% of Canadians surveyed are in favor of a woman's right to an abortion. 70% of people surveyed are concerned about a leaked opinion that suggests the U.S. Supreme Court is about to overturn Roe v. Wade. Pollster Christian Bork says while Canadians like to pay attention to American politics, he thinks the poll shows there is a concern over this leaked opinion and what it's leading up to. Governor General Mary Simon says a technology gap between northern and southern Canada persists. This is despite billions of dollars being spent on improving rural internet service. Ms. Simon is touring Quebec's northern Nunavik region this week, and she says there is no service on most major cell carriers in the area, and that Wi-Fi often slows down or drops out. That puts children at a disadvantage when schools shut down during the pandemic and affects people trying to have online medical appointments. Major automakers are warning the federal government about the need for more charging stations for electric vehicles. Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis say that Canadians won't buy electric vehicles if they aren't confident there will be a network of charging stations. The three are members of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. It has sent a list of recommendations urging the government to take a more ambitious and coordinated approach to electric vehicle charging. Moving to Alberta now, where 6 candidates vying to become the next federal Conservative Party leader will meet on a stage tonight for the first of 2 official debates. The event in Edmonton comes less than a week after 5 of the contenders took part in an unofficial debate in Ottawa. This was where much focus was paid to fighting COVID-19 mandates and the recent convoy protest in the nation's capital. Tonight, candidates will field questions on such topics as the future of energy, the environment, and the cost of living. Quebec is asking the federal government to close a wooded border crossing south of Montreal because the province can't handle the number of asylum seekers entering the country. More than 100 refugees are crossing illegally into Quebec from the U.S. every day at Roxham Road. And Premier François Legault wants Ottawa to shut down the unofficial border crossing. He says the province can't handle the number of asylum seekers and that many aren't really refugees. Mr. Legault points out that while the federal government spends 14 months to study asylum claims, his province is spending money, housing, and caring for would-be refugees and their children. The federal government is launching an online portal today to Canadian businesses so they can donate large-scale goods and services to Ukrainian refugees setting up homes here. That includes housing, gift cards for high-priority items, transportation, and jobs. The Trudeau government says Canadian companies expressed an interest in supporting people who have been impacted by the war in Ukraine. Loblaws, Canadian Tire, Metro, and Couche-Tard have already donated more than $400,000 worth of goods and services to the portal. The world-renowned Michelin Guide says it's making Toronto the first Canadian destination for its star-rated restaurant review system. It says inspectors have already begun visiting local eateries anonymously. The inaugural edition of the Michelin Guide Toronto will be announced this fall. And inspectors award 1, 2, or 3 stars for cuisine and bestow Bib Gourmand ratings on restaurants that offer great quality food at good prices. Coming up after the break, we'll have a look at the push for a national autism strategy in Canada. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly. The push for Canada to develop a national autism strategy is taking another leap forward. A report released Tuesday outlines the structural and systemic gaps facing people with autism and their families. Dr. Lonnie Zwagenbaum, the chair of the oversight panel that produced the paper, says a national strategy would provide a central vision in addressing social and economic barriers for people with autism, as well as their families and caregivers. Much of the study is also dedicated to highlighting the need to understand more about autism among Indigenous peoples. Well, joining us now to talk more on this is Dr. Isabel Smith, autism expert and professor in Dalhousie University's Department of Developmental Pediatrics. Dr. Smith, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So what are the structural and systemic gaps facing people with autism and their families in Canada?
I think a big one overall is the lack of recognition of the diversity of strengths and needs among autistic people. Autism is a spectrum itself, aligned with different levels of ability and disability. And then that intersects and overlaps with all the other sources of diversity among us all, gender, race, culture, all of those things. So we're talking about a large population with very diverse needs, and we're falling short. So that's a big one. I think another really big gap is in the disparity in access to services across the country. So, depending on where you live in Canada, you might have access to really quite different services if you're an autistic person or a family member of an autistic person. And I think that's something we really need to address.
All right, Doctor, let's talk solutions. What are these key recommendations from this report in terms of addressing these gaps here?
Well, I think there are recommendations around a number of areas. I think in general, increasing acceptance and understanding of autism and needs of autistic people through, concrete actions like increasing access to supports, funding sources for, various needed services. A huge need for capacity building in our healthcare system in particular, both to address diagnostic needs, on very long waiting lists for diagnosis, and access to mental health supports, because they're distinct mental health needs that are common among autistic people. Another key recommendation is really to increase the focus on autistic adults, because many of us, when we think about autism, think of children, think of the needs of autistic children, and that's where a lot of our services lie. Even those, we have disparities across the country, but when it comes to autistic adults, we really, people really fall off the cliff. We really don't have the kind of systematic support supports that are needed for this growing population.
It's clear there are a lot of diverse needs when it comes to people with autism. Now, the study also highlights the need to learn more about Indigenous people who have autism. So what do we know so far about their unique needs?
Well, that's the thing. We know very little, but this is a big step, because this report really went out of its way, the framers of the report, to engage Indigenous autistic people and their supporters, family members, and so on. So I think what we've learned is that the big thing is that all of the challenges that are faced by other autistic citizens are amplified for Indigenous Canadian autistic citizens, because they're again, that intersection with, the disadvantages that are often faced by those groups. For example, even feeling comfortable approaching the healthcare system if you've previously encountered stigma in that arena. So I think it's, we're just starting to learn. We're learning with Indigenous autistic people, and I think we've got a long way to go.
A lot of research to be done. Now, we've got about 45 seconds left here, but many families have been calling for support for years when it comes to autism. So how close is Canada to developing this national autism strategy?
We're a huge step closer now that we've got this report, because this is a first step that brought together, a huge number of voices from across the country, from all kinds of communities, from families, autistic people, researchers, clinicians, policy people. So that's a step that will allow us to now start building what are the supports that are needed. These recommendations that have been made are a first step, and then we need to enact these recommendations, to make active changes that address the needs of autistic people. But now we have a way to get there because we've identified what some of the issues are.
All right, Dr. Smith, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Canada's defense minister says the government is looking at intercontinental ballistic missile defense. This is part of a larger review of what is needed to better protect North America from attack. Anita Anand says Canada is weighing the option of joining the U.S. in actively defending against such missiles. The question has repeatedly reared its head as concerns rise about North Korea's growing nuclear arsenal and Russian aggression. Canada opted out of the U.S. ballistic missile defense program following a heated national debate in 2005. Well, joining us now to discuss ballistic missile defense is Dr. Rob Huebert, Arctic and defense expert and an associate professor at the University of Calgary. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is a ballistic missile, and how do such defense systems work?
Well, a ballistic missile, in its simplest way, is a missile that is able to enter into the atmosphere. So it's basically, once you get it into a semi-orbit, it is then able to come in and strike any target on Earth. And what happened once a ballistic missile was developed, and that was, of course, going back to Sputnik in 1959, both the Americans and the Soviets realized that was the means by which you could send a nuclear warhead onto any target anywhere in the international system, and it became the weapon of choice of both sides, both by launching by submarines, land-based, and there were some aircraft launched systems that were developed, but it was land and sea that were the primary usage of this delivery.
Sounds like a very dangerous weapon. Now, we mentioned Canada previously opted out of the U.S. ballistic missile defense program after a heated national debate in 2005. Can you unpack that debate for us?
Well, I got to push back a little bit. It wasn't a heated debate. We didn't have a debate on it. Part of the problem is that everybody was joining the Americans. NATO had a meeting in 2002, and it had been agreed that NATO was going to accept the American ballistic missile defense system and was to join in. And in Canada, we had almost no discussion about it. It was a margin minority government. And when we had an MOU that was basically set and sealed, like all the other NATO countries were doing, for political purposes, there were several of the Liberal MPs. The allegations is that they were in Quebec, but that's never been confirmed in any written aspect. And they told Martin that if he went ahead with ballistic missile defense, for reasons that were never explained, they would make the government fall. And for reasons we also don't understand, we know that Martin then fell subsequently. The Harper government, though making noises that it accepted missile defense, never opted to join. I'd like to make one thing, and I have to make this perfectly clear. NATO has accepted the US ABM treaty. Canada has accepted, and you can go to the declaration, the Warsaw Declaration under Article, I think it's 33, and it says that Canada accepts the fact that BMD is there to protect European countries. So we are the only country, and we also have to include the Japanese and the Australians that came on board, of the American allies and friends that are not protected by the AABM for what is just, quite frankly, political rationales.
And now Canada's rethinking ballistic missile defense. So how is the situation right now in 2022 different compared to 2005?
Well, when I listen to the exact words of the defense minister, it alarms me because once again, we've developed this element within this current government. We're always thinking, we're going to examine. I mean, you go all back to strong, secure, and engaged, our defense policy, where we were going to examine modernization of NORAD. And here we're in 2022, and we haven't done anything of the sort. So first and foremost, I'm very hesitant whenever I hear any of the ministers say they're thinking. It's usually, we want to put this off till people stop paying attention. What I find the most problematic is that all she is talking about is joining the Americans on the anti-ballistic missile defense. And now those are the weapons that will destroy humanity. Let's be clear on that. And so the defensive systems, of course, are important. The real threat that has now emerged are what are called hypersonic missiles. Now, some of them are semi-ballistic, but most of them are actually operating within the atmosphere. And so the question comes, is she using that as sort of a term when she says Canada is thinking about this? Are we truly thinking about the type of missile delivery systems that both the Japanese or that the Chinese and the Russians have created? Or once again, is she just playing to the audience and hoping no one notices that they don't do anything, as they haven't done anything since the strong, secure, and engaged?
All right, Dr. Huebert, a quick 30 seconds left here, but what are you watching for next as this situation develops?
Well, I'm looking for actual decisions where monies are being allocated, where we say we're not thinking about having ballistic defense. We're actually saying, okay, this is the systems we're tying into. This is how we're going to contribute to this threat, and a clear understanding that our leaders actually understand what the technology and threats are in 2022.
All right, Dr. Huebert, thank you again for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We'll be right back. The UK has signed a security assurance deal with Sweden and is promising to defend the country if it's attacked. Sweden and Finland are considering whether to join NATO following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also signed a similar defense commitment with Finland. South of the border, inflation cooled slightly in the U.S. last month after 7 months of increases. Consumer prices jumped 8.3% in April, which is down from the 8.5% year-over-year surge in March, which was the highest rate since 1981. Several factors are pointing to an inflation peak. Natural gas prices fell on average in April. Used car prices are also expected to have dropped last month, and automaker supply chains have unraveled a bit. Well, starting Monday, the European Union will no longer require masks to be worn at airports and on airplanes. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency is hoping the decision made with the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control will mark a big step forward to making air travel normal again for passengers and crews. Rules for masks may still vary by airline beyond Monday if they fly to or from destinations where the rules are different. All right, well, meanwhile, Roman Catholic Cardinal Joseph Zen, Canadian singer and activist Denise Ho, and 2 others have been detained in Hong Kong. The 4 are accused of colluding with foreign forces to endanger China's national security. A human rights group says the arrests are apparently related to their roles as trustees of a now closed fund, which provided legal aid to people who took part in 2019 pro-democracy protests. Mr. Ho was arrested last December, along with other former board members of the online pro-democracy outlet Stand News. News media outlet Al Jazeera is blaming Israel for the death of one of its well-known Palestinian reporters. She was shot and killed while covering an Israeli raid in the occupied West Bank early Wednesday. The Qatar-based broadcaster accused Israeli forces of deliberately targeting and killing their colleague, Shireen Abu Akleh, and vowed to take legal action. Israel's military says it is investigating, and Israel's defense minister has promised a thorough review. The UN and the Netherlands are co-hosting a pledging conference today to raise $144 million for Yemen. The money is needed to fund the salvage operation of a decaying tanker full of oil moored off the coast of the country. The amount includes $80 million to transfer the more than 1 million barrels of crude oil that the FSO Safer is carrying to storage. The ship is slowly rusting, and there are concerns it could explode, causing massive environmental damage to Red Sea marine life. A new UN report warns the frequency and duration of droughts will continue to increase due to human-caused climate change. This comes as water scarcity is already affecting billions of people across the world. The UN Desertification Agency, which is currently hosting a conference of parties in Abidjan, estimates that roughly 1/3 of the world's population is already living in water-scarce regions. And that number is expected to double by 2050. But with the right adaptation measures, water scarcity across the globe can be limited, according to the report. Meanwhile, Australian government scientists are looking at the impact of climate change on coral reefs. They say 91% of the Great Barrier Reef surveyed this year was bleached in the fourth mass event in 7 years. Coral becomes bleached in warmer than usual waters, and scientists worry about potentially lasting damage to the world's largest coral reef ecosystem. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Authority says this year's bleaching is the first during a La Nina weather pattern linked with cooler temperatures. The authority's chief scientist says mortality rates from this year's bleaching aren't very high. A former Polish dissident and human rights activist has won one of Spain's most prestigious awards. The jury that decides the Princess of Asturias Awards announced Wednesday that Adam Michnik won its annual prize for communication and humanities. He is editor-in-chief of one of Eastern Europe's most popular newspapers. The jury said that the 75-year-old Mr. Michnik was honored for his commitment to quality journalism and for his influence in restoring and defending democracy in Poland. The citation noted that Mr. Michnik was a prominent figure in Poland's Solidarity pro-democracy movement, and he was imprisoned in the 1980s for his efforts to end his country's repressive communist rule. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on social media. We're available on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all of our news and commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.